We are all terrified that this might not go right. I mean, they've done everything they can to make sure it will go right, but it's so complicated. So many things have to go perfectly.
I did want to ask you about the James Webb telescope delay.
Let me just get one thing. So this ended up being a 4-day delay for James Webb.
Right.
Which, so 32 years ago, I went to a meeting in Baltimore about the next generation space telescope. And this was the conference proceedings that I've had on my library shelf for the past 32 years, saying, we want to build this telescope that will come after Hubble. And this meeting was the year before Hubble was launched, right? And the topic of the meeting was, okay, we're going to launch Hubble now. What are we going to do after Hubble? And it's frankly not been a very edifying story. Many delays, many budget overruns. But 32 years later, we are now ready to launch this sucker. And it is an amazing piece of hardware. It better be for the money. So you can appreciate it then with that context, that a 4-day delay for me is like, I've been waiting long enough. Another 4 days isn't going to make a lot of difference. And so what happened down in Kourou? So one of the aspects of this mission is a joint mission between NASA and the European Space Agency. Mm-hmm. And the European Space Agency has contributed one of the instruments, but it's also contributed the rocket to take James Webb into space. And so this rocket, the Ariane 5, is launched from the Centre Spatial Guyanais in Guyane Française. And Guyane Française is a part of France that is in South America. Département is like a state, right? And so just like Hawaii is a part of the United States that's fully part of the United States, but it's not in the US mainland, French Guiana, Guyane Française, is a part of France that's fully part of France. It's just not in France, it's in South America. I managed to wangle back in 1998 a visit to the Centre Spatial Guyanais, the Guyana Space Center in French Guiana. And so it's an amazing place. You land, you take the plane to Cayenne. It's the capital of French Guiana, famous, of course, for cayenne pepper. Then you take the bus out along the coast to the town of Kourou, which is where the spaceport is. And so French Guiana is basically, it's like 90% of it is Amazon jungle. And then there's a strip of Caribbean beach along the coast. And then there's about 200 yards worth of a strip of France that is between the beach and the jungle. And so you come into the town of Kourou, and it's like this little French town. The fonts on the welcome to Kourou sign are the same as in any French village in France. The first building is the Renault car dealership. It's just like, I'm in France, except I'm in a tropical jungle. And you then roll through the town of Kourou to the hotel. And I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Papillon, which was an old 1970s, I think, Steve McQueen movie about Devil's Island, which was the French penal colony, just like the British used to send their prisoners to Botany Bay in Australia. The French used to send their political prisoners to Devil's Island. But Devil's Island is now the tracking station, and the old prison site on the mainland across from it is now the fancy hotel where they put up the guests for the spaceport. So they put us up, and so you've got Caribbean beach, French cooking, what's not to like, right? And then you go to the base itself, which is guarded by the French Foreign Legion. and you have this incredibly hypermodern spaceport that was developed in the late 60s, early 70s, when the French got kicked out of Algeria. France used to have, Algeria used to be a French colony, and they built their first spaceport in the desert, in the Sahara Desert in Algeria. And then in decolonialization in the 1960s and 1970s, France had to leave Algeria. The Algerians didn't want them, understandably, wanted to be independent. And so the last French rocket launch from Africa was 1967. And in 1970, they started launching from Kourou. So that's been the main European spaceport ever since. And it's a big advantage because it's really near the equator. It's about 5 degrees latitude.
Oh, wow.
And so if you're launching to an equatorial orbit, you get the spin of the Earth, the maximum boost from the spin of the Earth, because you're near the equator. And so that is, that makes your rocket slightly cheaper than launching from Cape Canaveral. And I can tell you, having tried both, that the Hotel de Roche in Kourou is a very much more pleasant experience than the Satellite Motel in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Sorry, Satellite Motel. And so, they all that put together, it turns out that the Ariane rocket got a lot of the commercial satellite launch market in the 80s, 90s, and 00s before SpaceX came along. So it's an interesting place. So that's where the James Webb is now. It's being placed on top of the Ariane 5 rocket. And as they were tightening everything up, there's a clamp that clamps the spacecraft to the top of the rocket. And that clamp sprung open somewhat violently and unexpectedly, shaking the whole thing. It's a $10 billion, extremely delicate, extremely intricate piece of machinery that you do not want to shake unnecessarily.
Was this like human error? What do you think happened?
We don't know, probably, yeah. There's probably some sequence of operations that was done in the wrong order.
Nice.
And so that scared people for a bit, but they've checked it. Everything seems to be fine. And so they're going to go ahead with the launch. So that will be on December 22nd.
Right.
And so the big Ariane booster will take off from this spaceport at the edge of the Amazon jungle, and it will head east over the Atlantic, dropping 2 massive solid rocket boosters in the ocean. And then the very powerful core stage will be just short of orbit. We'll release the upper stage. The core stage will fall back into, I guess, the eastern part of the Atlantic, just off Africa. Upper stage will fire for quite a long time to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate the vehicle until it is almost at escape velocity. And so it will dump it in an Earth orbit where the low point is about 300 or so kilometers above the Earth. Typical LEO, altitude maybe 250. And the high point is 1.1 million kilometers from the Earth. So well beyond the moon. And it will take about a month to get to that far point.
Wow.
And in late in mid-January, late January, the observatory will, the upper stage will keep on going and probably end up actually in orbit around the sun. I'm not sure. The James Webb will fire its little rocket engines to circularize its orbit and enter what's called a halo orbit around the Sun-Earth Lagrange 2 point, which is 1 million miles towards midnight. And so you're 1 million miles from Earth, and the Earth and Sun are in the same direction, tugging on you the same way. And there's a balance that lets you stay there very cheaply. And every few months, you have to just do a little spritz on your gas thrusters to stay in place, anchored to this imaginary point in space. And so it's a great place for space observatories to be. There's a bunch there already, including Gaia, which is the European star mapping satellite. And so James Webb is gonna settle in at that point, very, very far from Earth, but still, following the Earth around the Sun, not going off to Mars or something like that. And it will begin its observations, assuming that it unpacks itself successfully. And the problem is that James Webb is such a big telescope that it's sort of origami folded to get inside the rocket fairing. Mm-hmm. And so on that month that it's cruising from Earth to L2, one of the things that it's doing is slowly unfolding like a flower. And it, first the solar panel unfolds, and the rocket thruster boom unfolds, and then the big structural paddles unfold, and from them the sunshade unfolds. And this is a critical piece because the sunshade is keeps the telescope cool. And so the sunshade points towards the Earth and the Sun, catches all that light, reflects it, keeps the space side of the deep space side of the telescope really cold. If that sunshade doesn't unfold, your $10 billion are down the drain. Then, assuming that works okay, you unfold the telescope structure itself, the sort of intricate things where it petals on either side unfold, the secondary mirror zooms forward, and that has to be so precise. You have to unfold it in such a way that the distances between the different pieces are where they need to be to like some incredibly small fraction of a millimeter. And so you have to be able to adjust it. You test, then you go, okay, we need to move that piece forward a scooch, and so on. And so it's going to take a while to get everything so that it can make a proper in-focus image. If that all goes perfectly, then Webb will start returning amazing science sometime in early 2022.
I mean, is there a real concern that it won't go perfectly?
Yeah, every astronomer I know is, no, I can't say that on YouTube, is exceedingly nervous, put it that way.
Real?
Yes, we are all terrified that this might not go right. I mean, they've done everything they can to make sure it will go right, but it's so complicated. So many things have to go perfectly.
No way.
Yeah, it is. Everyone is really, really nervous because we've got so many of our eggs in this one basket.
Yeah.
And it's a very fragile basket that could easily go wrong. And so I know some of the engineers at Northrop Grumman in California who built the spacecraft, and they're really good. I really, I trust them. They're smart people. They're great people. But this is such an insanely complicated design that however good you are, there is a risk that there will be a gotcha. And it probably won't be in the most difficult part, right? What tends to go wrong in spacecraft is the thing that you spent a year worrying about and getting just right goes fine. And the really stupid thing that you missed doesn't work. And the public go, how could you possibly miss that? But the problem is there are like 10,000 really dumb, stupid things that individually are not that hard to get right. But all 10,000 of them have to be right, and it's really easy to miss one. Wow. And so that's the fear.
So did this thing with the clamp kind of add to your fears, because that was just so unexpected?
Yeah, because it's just another, it's another little thing, and who knows if they they think it's okay, but maybe something come loose that they didn't notice. There was just a few months earlier in testing, they were testing the sun shield deployment.
Yeah.
And there were loose bolts that came out and things like that, and that was embarrassing. And so all along there have been, signs that this is, I wouldn't say worrying signs, but signs that this is, really hard to get right.
Delicate.
It's very delicate. Things are, have not been perfect during the test sequence. They think everything's working now, but it would not be that surprising. Let me put it this way: I'll be astonished if it goes perfectly smoothly, right? Even in the best case, what I think will happen is, as you're deploying the sunshade, something will get stuck, and they'll have to wait a few weeks and figure out how to get around it and tug on one bit, using some pre-programmed thing, and get something loose, and then everyone will breathe a sigh of relief and they'll continue deploying it. Something like that. I would be surprised if there isn't something like that. There'll be some heart-stopping moment where, something is not going quite right, but they can still get around it. And that's the good scenario, right? And the bad scenario is they can't get around it and we lose the mission. So all of astronomy is holding its collective breath until this thing starts returning data. And even if, things can be really subtle. I'm old enough, right, as we discussed, to remember when Hubble went up. And looked like the Hubble launch had gone perfectly. And first few weeks, everything sounded great. And they were doing focus tests on the telescope. And they were focusing it up. And, they released an image showing, the center of the image is really sharp. Looks good, guys. And then it was just over, a period of weeks that they sort of started to clam up, and rumors started to circulate that all was not well. I got this email with someone hinting that, something was very badly wrong. And finally it went public, I think it was June, so it's 2 months after launch. They went, it turns out that we made the mirror wrong. We need to do a rescue mission to put contact lenses on the front of it and correct its vision. It was awful. And then, now Hubble is a success story, right? We all know that Hubble has returned this amazing data. But for the first year of its life in space, Hubble was the butt of jokes. It was NASA screws up again. It was pretty bad for a while. And, NASA being NASA, they found a solution, and they launched a shuttle mission to go and replace some cameras and add in some corrective optics and things like that. Amazing feat of, and the public loves a comeback kid story. That's part of what made Hubble so beloved. It's the comeback kid. It was a screw up and then it got fixed. And so, so just to say that even it can sometimes take a while for the bad news to become apparent even to the people using it. So until we've really been using it for a while, we won't really know how successful it is. But
how much more powerful is James Webb than the Hubble?
Well, it's different, but one way of looking at it is the size of the mirror. And so the mirror on James Webb is 6.5 meters, which is almost 3 times the size of Hubble in linear size. But what counts is the area, which is the square of that. So it's actually it's over 7 times more collecting area than Hubble.
Okay.
And so it can see much fainter things. On the other hand, it's designed to work in infrared light instead of visible light. And so that doesn't mean it's 7 times as good as Hubble, looking at the same things as Hubble looked at, right? It's got a different set of cameras that are infrared cameras. it's going to look in many cases at different things that Hubble couldn't see. So it's a bit complicated comparing apples and oranges in some ways. But another way of thinking about it is that Hubble could take sharp pictures with lots of incredible detail of galaxies near to us. And it could see really distant galaxies, but it could only see them as little dots. James Webb will be able to look at those little dots and return pictures that are like the pictures that Hubble got of the nearby galaxies.
Wow.
Right? And then it's going to see even further and see the even more distant galaxies as little dots. Right? So it's gonna take the clarity that we had at like 1 billion light years and move it out to 10 billion light years, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be able to do a lot of things that a lot of measurements that Hubble couldn't make. The James Webb can't see ultraviolet light. It can't even see regular visible light. And so if you have an experiment that needs that visible light and ultraviolet light, then you've got to use Hubble, not Webb. Webb is not a replacement for Hubble in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, astronomers are talking about doing a replacement for Hubble down the road. That would have the similar capabilities or better capabilities, because Webb is a different thing.